welcome to the Arrive Podcast, the U.S. Immigration Law Podcast for Canadians. Today we'll be discussing U.S. citizenship, and specifically how you acquire citizenship. People call in all the time, and they wonder and have the question if they are a U.S. citizen or not.
Right. Am I a U.S. citizen? My mom was a U.S. citizen, but I was born in Canada, but I wanna live in the U.S. now.
Yes. So and that's the most common question we get. I know I'm Canadian, I was born in Canada, but I have a father or a mother that was U.S. citizen, and maybe even grandparents. It could even go that far down the line. And they want to know whether or not they're in fact a U.S. citizen and have rights to U.S. citizenship. So you can obtain U.S. citizenship traditionally in two standard ways. If you're born inside the United States,
You probably are a U.S. citizen.
you are a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
100%. And that's called jus soli. If you look at the law, jus soli. You were born here in the United States. You were born on American soil. You're a U.S. citizen. And this comes up in the news all the time. They talk about it. They call them anchor babies. People come here, have a baby in the United States just to get that child citizenship, and then they go back to their home country. And
21 years
in
later.
hopes that
Yeah.
in 21 years that child will be able to then sponsor them to get a green card and come to the United States. Very long road, path to do it that way,
Yeah.
but that child would be a U.S. citizen, and then anyone else born in the United States, period, you are a U.S. citizen if you're born on U.S. soil. So that's the easiest way to become a citizen, is just to be born one. And there are ways, and this is where people aren't aware, that if you are born in a foreign land to a U.S. citizen parent, you could in fact be a U.S. citizen. And there's certain laws that apply to determine whether or not you in fact can acquire citizenship through birth to that U.S. citizen parent. And the most common documents that you would obtain as proof of that is what is called a consular report of birth abroad, and that's where if you're born to a U.S. citizen parent and that parent meets certain physical presence requirements in the United States, you can go to the consulate or the embassy and obtain a consular report of birth abroad. And that is a birth certificate that proves your U.S. citizenship and that you were born outside of the United States. In addition to that, as a U.S. citizen, you have the right to a U.S. passport. So typically when people do this, they apply for both a consular report of birth abroad and a passport. But
There's limitations on that. So.
and time restraints,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you turn 18 years old, then you're going to be limited to obtaining a passport.
Yeah, that child isn't, and a child who, as soon as they turn 18, is no longer eligible for the consular report of birth abroad. So that needs to be done before the child's 18th birthday.
And that has to be one of the main things that people call in, and their parents may meet the physical presence requirement. They could have got it, but they didn't do it before they were 18 years old, so they can't get that consular report of birth abroad.
Yeah, and as a result, if anyone calls us and they have a child that, if they're a U.S. citizen and they just have questions about something else, I'll often ask, did you get a consular report of birth abroad for your child? And sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. I always recommend they get
it right away.
to preserve that if that's something that they
Life
want
gets
the child.
hectic and you forget to do it.
And we get so many calls from people that their parents didn't take that action for them and they regret it now.
So if you're looking at current law, and I'm looking at a resource right now, if you're looking at current U.S. immigration law and you're born after 1986, there's a predominant rule that applies to those that are born outside the United States.
To one U.S. citizen parent.
At least one U.S. citizen parent.
And then a non-U.S. citizen parent.
In wedlock.
And the parents were married, exactly.
Yes, you have to be married. So if you were born outside of the United States after 1986, and the rules change depending on when you were born. We're not going to go into all of those because it's changed several times over the decades. But the most recent one, the one that you're dealing with now, if you're born after 1986, says that if you were born to a U.S. citizen parent outside of the United States, you would have to show that your U.S. citizen parent was physically present in the United States for at least 5 years prior to the child's birth, 2 of which were after the parent turned 14 years of age.
Right, so it can be a little complicated in explaining it. And the first thing to understand is, what is physical presence? What does that mean? That means that the person, your parent, was actually living in the United States.
Went
They
to
didn't
school.
just have, right, they
They
didn't
worked.
just have a house here.
Pay taxes.
They were actually physically with their feet on the ground in the United States for that period of time. So we've seen cases where people are like, oh, well, I have these school records showing my parent went to college in the US and high school, and, you know, or certain years of they studied in the United States. The consulate will actually look at the dates that they studied, and if you don't have proof that they were here maybe during the summer months, if they weren't attending class in July and August, they'll subtract those months from that 12-month period. So you actually have to have physical proof, documentary proof of the entire period.
Yes, and it has to be well documented.
That's the key, yeah.
Yeah, you can't just say, "Oh yeah, I know my parent was here for 14 years. They moved to Canada when they were 15 years old." Okay, what do you have to prove that?
Right.
How can you show their physical presence? And that's what you went into. And the most common records there, I think, school records are the ones that I see for younger
Yeah, and
individuals.
military service records
Military.
are great too.
I had one client rely on prison records. The father
Oh.
was in prison. So there are a lot of different records you can
Social
use.
security records as
Social
well to show
security
you where we
records.
were working in the US, yeah.
Tax filings. All of these can show physical presence. Religious records, right? Baptismal records, confirmations, things
Medical
of that nature.
records from doctor's offices, I've seen
Medical
those,
records.
vaccination records.
Rent, proof that you rented a place. Some of
Leases,
these
yeah.
things people don't keep, so it's hard to go after. So the records that are public are typically the ones that people use
I
because
think
they
going
are
forward,
preserved.
you know, because everything's being preserved digitally now, this is just my theory, it's gonna become easier for people to access these documents. When you're going back to like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, when there wasn't a digital record of anything, it becomes a lot harder to generate those and find them.
Yeah, now you can say, hey, I want my college transcript. You go in, you pay $5, and they email it to you.
Yeah.
Boom, you got it. Yeah, I think you're right, and that's where we're going. Everything's becoming digital. Now, there are some cases where the parent may not meet the physical presence requirement
Yep, I have
because they moved to Canada
when they were 5 years
when,
old or.
when they were
yeah.
very young. Maybe they were an anchor baby themselves. Maybe they were born in the United States and their family went straight back to Canada, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they were here as an infant or a very young child. So they don't have the 5-year physical presence, and they definitely don't have the 2 years after turning age 14.
Yeah.
In those cases, they can rely on the physical presence of a grandparent.
In some cases.
In some cases,
Yeah.
if you meet all the requirements, you can rely on physical presence of a grandparent rather than your parent. So you
But
can
again,
still
you
acquire it
you
through your
have to
parent.
keep in mind, that's only for children up to the age of 18. So again, once the child turns 18, that the availability of using the grandparent's physical presence in the place of the parents that opportunity is gone once the child turns 18.
Yes, and that's for a certificate of citizenship. So it's another proof of U.S. citizenship that you can obtain if you're born outside of the United States. And there's different criteria that apply to that as well. But if you did age out, you turn 18, worst case scenario, if you're still able to prove your physical presence in the United States, in a lot of these cases we see individuals are still able to apply for a U.S. passport and obtain a passport. So we recommend getting that proof of citizenship as early as possible. If you have a child outside of the United States, you're a U.S. citizen, go get that consular report of birth abroad right away. Go get that passport right away. And not only just for that proof of citizenship, but for situations like COVID, where there have been severe restrictions on travel. Well, if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to come to the United States, you can come. Those restrictions don't apply to U.S. citizens because you're coming back to your homeland. If you don't have proof of that, then you could face issues at the border. You could also face issues if they think that you're a U.S. citizen or they think that your child's a U.S. citizen. If they think that you are, then they could refuse your entry and tell you to get proof of whatever your citizenship is, or they may say, you need a work visa. We have a lot of people that are applying for like a TN visa, for example. And we had this scenario just a few months back, An individual was applying for a work visa, and he had on his file what's called an A number, and that's an alien number. That's what's assigned to all foreign nationals that are trying to immigrate to the United
They need
States.
to change that.
They said that they're changing, but it's a number assigned to each foreign national trying to come to the United States permanently. And they refused the TN visa because they thought that either this individual had become a U.S. permanent resident, and potentially you could get citizenship based on that. But that permanent residency indicated that individual might have another status that would not warrant them to be able to get a TN visa. Because if you are a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you can't have a work visa in the United States.
You don't need one.
Because you don't need one.
Right.
So if they identify you as an individual who potentially is a U.S. citizen, they could turn you away on that and tell you to come back with proof and show that you are in fact either a U.S. citizen or not a U.S. citizen.
I mean, there are some reasons why people don't want to have access to U.S. citizenship, and I've had lots of phone calls with people once we run through the rights and responsibilities of a U.S. citizen. They decide that that's something that they don't want for their family, and they, decline to move forward with that, but they just wanted to know, what the issues were. So one of the responsibilities would be that child or that person would then be obligated to file U.S. taxes on a regular basis, annual basis, like the rest of the citizens of the United States, and that's something that's based on your citizenship, not on your residency. So plenty of times when I have accessed U.S. citizenship or got acknowledgement of that for clients that are old enough to need to file taxes, that's one of the things they do first, is file the a few years back taxes or
Speak
tax
to an
returns.
accountant and to figure out what your obligations are.
Right, to make sure that they're everything's right with the IRS for them.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind too. It's a reason why I've had parents that say, no, I don't want to get it for my child because I don't want them to have that obligation.
And then the most common thing we see is people that they want their kids to go to school in the United States, they want job opportunities in the United States, things that might not be available in Canada. Canada's a ginormous country, beautiful, tons of land, not a lot of people, less opportunity. And we see this with individuals and businesses, where you have 30-something million people in Canada and over 300 million in the US, and they just want to take advantage of the economy and everything that America has to offer. So they want citizenship.
And you don't have to live in the United States if you are a U.S. citizen. So if you obtain the proof of citizenship for your child, they never have to live in the United States. They may decide that that's not something they want. Your family may never relocate, and they may never take advantage of that. And that's fine.
But
they don't have to. But they have
or want it.
They have the opportunity.
Yep.
And the option available to them. So you're keeping that open for your child if you do it.
Yeah, unlike a U.S. permanent resident who's obligated, you're supposed to live here at least 50% of your time.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. citizen can live wherever they want.
Right.
You could move to, China if you
Timbuktu.
wanted. It doesn't matter. You're a U.S. citizen. If you want to come back, they have to let you re-enter the United
As
States.
long as you have a valid passport, they'll let you in.
Yeah. So, yeah, and this is something we see all the time because of the proximity of the Canadian border and access to the United States. There are so many cross-border relationships. Canadians, snowbirds, they like to spend their summers down here in the United States. Sometimes children are born when that happens.
I mean,
Sometimes there's a
I
relationship
think
that develops.
the more likely one that we see here in the Buffalo area is the people that have just a cross-border lifestyle and their families. They have family that lives in Niagara Falls, New York, and family that lives in Niagara Falls, Ontario, and they've always moved freely back and forth across the border, and relationships were built. And we see that a lot where, my dad was born in Niagara Falls, New York. He lived there until he was a certain age, and then he moved to Niagara Falls, Ontario, and married my mom, and then I was born.
Well, and back then, before things started getting strict with 9/11, people live and work in the United States without proof of any status.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't an issue, but now it is. So
Yes.
it's important to make sure that your child has that proof. If you want them to be able to access, their U.S. citizenship and all that has to offer.
So if you have questions about U.S. citizenship and whether or not you're a U.S. citizen, it's best to speak to an attorney. The laws like we mentioned earlier, change depending on when you were born, whether you were born when your parents were married or you were born out of wedlock. There's different laws that apply. For example, out of wedlock, you may only have to show a year of physical presence, but then, and Christine, you mentioned this earlier, it's continuous. And we saw an instance where a client tried to do this on their own. They went to the consulate in Toronto. They applied for citizenship for the child. The child was born out of wedlock. Under the law that was in effect at the time of the child's birth, the parent just had to show 1 year of continuous residence in the U.S.
1 year,
prior,
wow.
1 year prior to the child's birth, and then the child was good to go. During the interview at the consulate, she mentioned that during a holiday, it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas, that she would go to Canada and spend time in Canada. And the consular officer denied it, saying your residence wasn't continuous because you weren't here. She couldn't prove that she had 1 year of continuous residence without breaking that residence going to Canada. So they denied on those grounds.
That was for a consular report of birth abroad?
It was.
Mm.
So we were able to take another method to get the child, now they have to go through and petition the child for a green card and then citizenship. So it's a long drawn out process that may have been able to be done at the consulate if done correctly. But you have to be careful, and there's very strict rules, and these officers will hold you to it. And if you can't prove it, they could deny on that basis. So it's a great benefit if you can prove it. If you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. We deal with these all the time. And thank you for joining us today for the Riot Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. If you can subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We're simulcasting on YouTube as well as on the podcast as well. So you can subscribe to YouTube to listen to us, or you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And if you haven't already, give us a thumbs up so other people out there that are looking for similar content can find it. Thank you for watching or listening today, and have a great day.